from what it sounds like, quite along with DC, Lucky Raccoon, Alpha Flight, Hulk, Comic Odyssey, and Gotham by Gaslight, which I finally got to read recently and catch up on. And he's worked in adaptations for Bram Stoker's Dracula, which, is that true that that's coming back soon?
Yes,
In a
IDW, despite the fact that nobody has been able to get that book back into print, IDW somehow managed to do it.
Nice. I'm anxious to see it. And am I saying this right? Fafford?
I don't know.
I
call it Fafford and the Grey Master,
Fafford.
but who the fuck knows?
Yeah. Which is actually a book I've ordered twice since I found out I was holding this, and I still haven't been able to get it delivered or find it correctly. But I'm bound to. And Hellboy obviously debuted in '93, and we all know the canon and everything that launched from there. Along with some of his other collected works, Mr. Higgins Comes Home, The Amazing Screw-On Head, and BPRD, and quite a few more. So a few bits of housekeeping real quick, just to kind of get to it. For those interested, don't forget, April 13th is a conversation with Mike and Karen Green at the Society of Illustrators. And then, of course, the exhibition that's going on there through the 28th, I believe, as well. And obviously, hopefully, all of you have been able to see Mike's work along with a lot of other guests in the show, because, by all rights, this is one hell of an education in and of itself. And speaking of which, especially from my background, I mean, I guess a good place to start would be, earliest works and influences. I mean, there's a lot about where we come from that really defines who we are and where our story interests lie. So, what are really like some of the greatest works that, like, the earliest things that you remember hitting you from ground one?
In elementary school, I remember checking out over and over and over a book on Norse mythology.
Yeah.
Because I like monsters. It was very illustrated. Somehow my elementary school library had an illustrated version of The Pilgrim's Progress, which I would bring home and give to my mother and say, read this to me. And she said, you don't really want me to read this to you. But it had at least one illustration of a knight and a giant snake.
Yeah.
And then by 6th grade, I had discovered a book about ghosts that had a really, still my favorite, chilling, supposedly true photo of a ghost.
Yeah.
I remember checking that one out of the library a bunch of times. So I don't know where it all started, but I know by 5th, 6th grade, I was pretty heavily into that stuff.
And did it like curve, and really kind of define how you launched, like, your selections and your decision making in terms of what really you went after? And
What solidified it was reading Dracula. I think it was age 13, read Dracula, and I remember sitting, I don't know why I was in my father's bedroom, but I remember sitting on the edge of his bed and thinking, this is it.
Yeah.
This is it for me. This is what I want to read. This is the shit I like. This is my world. And that really was it. I mean, that led to the Victorian literature, the mythology and the mythology clearly was already cooking with the Norse mythology stuff, but the folklore and all that stuff, I don't know exactly where it started, but Dracula was the one that brought it all together and said, boom, this is out there, give me more of this shit.
Well, were you...
Are there any kids in here? Should probably check. Okay.
I think we're good. So, I mean, was this like an encouraged pursuit in terms of comics and art as a career on your end?
It was not. I mean, my mother died when I was young, which is probably factors into this somewhere. But my father was a very blue-collar cabinet maker, working stiff guy who was artistic but never recognized that he was artistic because he was a woodworking guy. Yeah. So that to him was just the job. Yeah. So all he ever knew about artists was that they starved. But looking back, he wasn't discouraging. He just figured you're not going to figure out how to make a living. Yeah. So, he was the one when I finished junior college, and I was going to go off and just try to be an illustrator, and he was the one who wanted me to go to art school because he figured no one in the family had ever gone to college. So I was like, well, if you get a degree of some kind, then maybe you can get a job teaching.
Yeah.
So he wasn't discouraging, but he was, okay, if you're going to do this stupid thing, at least figure out some practical way that you can maybe make a living at it.
Yeah. And I mean, I've noticed too, especially with like a lot of the films and everything, looking through, obviously trolling you, but looking through a lot of, and it's great to see very similar works, but
one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. Well, I mean, especially with Huston, and everybody know John Huston? Anybody not know John Huston's work? Shame on all of you.
He made Moby Dick and The Man Who Would Be King.
Yeah.
And The Maltese Falcon.
And
a million other movies.
Yeah, there's a huge breadth of knowledge. But I mean, squint your eyes, and I think you can see like where this stuff comes from. I mean,
no, nothing to do with it.
It is amazing.
It's a very strange film. I showed it to a film class.
Yeah.
They brought me in and said, we'll show one of your favorite movies, and it was actually they wanted a fantasy film, and they couldn't get Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast. I said, get Moby Dick.
Yeah.
Because it's all, even though it's never categorized as a fantasy film, it's such a strange film in a certain way. When these guys get on the ship and leave, it looks like a funeral. And it's just women wearing, saying goodbye to their husbands for the last time as they go off to be, wailing. And it almost reads like this is a ghost ship.
Yeah.
And it's so dramatic, and it's so beautifully written. I've never read the book, but Ray Bradbury did the adaptation, and it's just such a gorgeous use of language and drama, and it's just, I saw it over and over and over. It's one of those things our local TV station must have owned a print.
Oh, really?
So it was on every couple of months, and I can still watching it. I know where the commercial breaks come in.
Yeah.
I can see the commercial for it. And it's still one of my all-time favorite movies.
Oh, that's awesome. They had
Harpoon, by the way, factors into my work quite often.
Well, it's awesome to see these tidbits because how much of your life experience, right? Like even multimedia, especially obviously through film, but the experiences that you've had. I mean, how much of that really comes into play into what has kind of influenced your work? Has it been all art? Have you had specific experiences? I've
had no experience.
Did you take a pottery class and that blew your mind?
No.
How much of this comes
I've had very little real life experience of it all. I cocooned myself in a world of watching movies and reading books. And mostly it's books. Yeah. For whatever reason, like a lot of the classic, horror movies, ghost movies and stuff, I never saw them when I was young. I never saw Bride of Frankenstein until I was in college.
Really? Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, so I was really, from a relatively early age, I was a book guy.
You were fermenting the hermit lifestyle.
Oh yeah.
You were entrenched.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
I went through various literary phases where and again I was a comic book reader.
Yeah.
Not a huge comic book reader, but I think it was like when Marvel Comics was doing Conan.
Yeah.
I got really into that stuff, which led me into.
Is that when you started reading all the Howard stuff?
All the pulp stuff, and it was
Yeah.
the 70s, which was a great time for books because they were reprinting all the Doc Savage and the Shadow and all that shit, and then they were reprinting all the Robert E. Howard stuff, and they were reprinting the Michael Moorcock Elric stuff. So I went through this real hardcore fantasy period where and which led back to the older pulp guys, and I was living in Oakland and spending my weekends going into Berkeley, which was made of used bookstores.
Yeah.
So I was just, devouring that stuff. There's a couple-year period there, maybe the last year in high school or the last 2 years in high school and the first year of, it would have been high school years, that I was just soaking all this shit up. I mean, it's just, there's certain things, some of these authors, it's a little wonky to read them now, but I was soaking that stuff up at exactly the right age, and it's just, cooks in there.
Yeah.
And it took me, I mean, I mentioned Michael Moorcock, I don't know if anybody's read him, but Michael Moorcock did several different series about these very doomed fantasy characters. And it took years for me to realize, oh, that's where Hellboy came from.
Yeah.
It's that, I'm going to beat the shit out of this guy, and I'm eventually going to feel really sorry for him. But sorry, you're just going to suffer. You were put here to suffer. And Michael Moorcock had Elric and any number of other characters like that. So,
yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
And I mean, how much of that is that when you started writing? Like, when did you really start taking a chance on scripting and really? Because it's one thing to know what you're influenced by, but another to really sit down and do it.
There was a very brief period somewhere in high school. I've never told this story. Somewhere in high school, I started thinking, because I got really into the idea of the pulp writers, and these were the guys working in the 20s and the 30s, and they were just like Robert E. Howard, who blew his brains out at age 30, wrote 10,000 stories. This guy was just hammering this shit out and put it in the mail and getting rejected by a magazine, and they'd send it back, and he would change a Conan story to a Cull story and submit it to another magazine, and he would take a Western and turn it into a Conan story. I loved that idea of a guy just hammering this shit out. Mm-hmm. So I started writing short, God, thank God they don't exist, these short fantasy stories, my kind of Conan type stories.
Oh, come on, you gotta have these.
And one of them, a page of one, I was in the lunchroom at school, and a page of one fell out of my binder, and somebody picked it up and started reading it out loud. And that was the last time I wrote. Until I did Hellboy.
Seriously?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I made shit up. I thought about shit I wanted to draw. And what happened is, 10 years of Marvel Comics and DC Comics, nobody ever shows up saying, hi, I've read your mind. Here's the book you made out of all the shit you want to draw. And at some point you go, the only way... Well, no, I plotted a Batman story. Mm-hmm. Archie Goodwin, the great Archie Goodwin, phenomenal editor, wonderful guy, super intimidating because a genius writer. He was editing this Batman book at DC, and he said, for whatever reason, he said, you should try writing one. And I went, well, so I made up one that was made out of all the shit I wanted to draw. Because my goal in life is to only draw the shit I want to draw, and not the shit that's hard or difficult or, Yeah, because that's too much of those 10 years of comics was getting a script and going, fuck, I don't know how to draw that. So I'm going to make up a Batman story about Batman in a cemetery who falls into a grave and then wakes up in some kind of Victorian dreamland made out of old furniture. And I remember pitching Archie that story, and he said, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
I did it, and I got away with it. A friend of mine scripted it, because I didn't know how to write anything, but I knew how to string together pictures I wanted to draw.
Yeah.
And when that thing worked, it was one of the very few times where I had a real conscious decision to make. Because I've made up a story so I could draw the shit I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Let's do more of that.
Mm-hmm.
But do I continue to do those and shoehorn other people's characters in? Because I didn't know shit about Batman. Mm-hmm. So that was one of those, I know what he looks like. And at the beginning of the story, he's fighting a guy in a cemetery, because I guess that's what superheroes do. And the rest of it is just a straight-up ghost story. You could have swapped anybody else in it for Batman. So I was like, well, why don't I at least... And then, of course, the Image Comics thing is going on. Those guys are making like $1 million every 30 seconds. And it's like, maybe I should do something like that. And I thought briefly about doing a Batman kind of thing, because I thought, well, one of the few things people seem to like the way I draw is Batman. But I thought, oh man, what if it doesn't work? And I'm slow, and I'm going to spend a year drawing this thing, and my luck is it'll be the first Image book that nobody buys, and I will have spent a year of my life drawing something that I don't enjoy doing, and nobody's going to give a shit about it. So if I'm going to do it, why don't I make up something I actually like, and be fully prepared and completely expect that it'll only do one miniseries. It won't sell. I'll never get to do it again. But at least I will put something out there that is mine.
Yeah.
So on my deathbed, which is a very big thing with me, deathbed. Apparently I have a lot of plans for my deathbed. One of them was going to be me laying there with a shaky hand going, at least once I drew something I gave a shit about before I crawled back to get whatever jobs I could get. And it just happened to work.
That was a huge chance. I mean,
it wasn't. Well, go ahead, finish your thought.
Well, yeah, I mean, thank you. Well, it's insane to hear that, considering all of the legacy and everything we're taught and the things you come to expect as a creator. I mean, it takes a lot to really invest and believe in oneself when in a lot of times in education and how we grow up and what we look at, there's so many chances you take, especially in storytelling and especially in comics. But obviously that's, things are changing now, but that was, hearing that now, that's like, which I love now, but that's jumping off a cliff.
Well, in a way it is. I mean, the confidence thing is a real battle. Yeah. But I think I was so driven by desperation because I was so bad at drawing mainstream comics. It was, I gotta figure out some way to have a career. Because I have no skills of any kind. I can't drive a car. I can't remember my own phone number. I mean, anything I've got, I poured into this one little thing I can do at the sacrifice of everything else. There's just very little of me to go around.
Yeah.
Plus, I'm lazy as shit. I probably could learn to drive a car, but I'm just too lazy. Where was I going with that? But I have heard a lot of people, the reason I started to cut you off was I've had so many people say, oh, but that was such a risky move to go and do Hellboy. But it wasn't. I was very fortunate that after 10 years of doing mainstream comics, Dark Horse had said to me, we'd like to publish something of yours. So I know it's very different now. So there was a good timing thing there where I had a publisher. I did have a track record.
You had that support.
I had a track record, and they said, we will pay you probably the same thing Marvel and DC had been paying me to draw your creator-owned book, which you will own. I mean, you'll really own, not DC Comics, Marvel Comics creator-owned. This was like, you're really going to own it, including all the film rights and everything else. And he went, I'll do that. But I knew that when it was over, I would go back and draw a Batman book. I didn't have another job lined up, but I was living in New York. I knew half of the people on staff at DC. One of the beauties of living in New York is I ended up being in the office and getting to know these guys. And some of them actually became really good friends of mine. So it was a very comfortable environment for me to walk out and say, I'm going to go do this Dark Horse thing. I'll probably be back.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's awesomely refreshing to hear. So, confidence, everybody.
Confidence, I have no idea, because I'm so chicken shit about everything. How I ever had the confidence to actually produce the work. But it's because I felt I had no choice. It's
I have quotes here of like self-deprecation, just like continuing on the backs of books and interviews. But in reality, I mean, there could not be anything more confident than in, like you said, like the focus that you're. Kind of putting together.
There's a bit of a schizophrenic thing there. Yeah. Even in the art style, it's pretty ballsy in some ways. But again, a very slow process of gaining.
Yeah.
There's a certain amount of desperation because you can't do anything else.
Yeah.
There is really something to be said for working without a net. I came to New York right out of art school. Followed the first lunatic I met who said, hey, I'm going to New York. And I said, you got a place to stay? He said, yeah. I said, can I go? He goes, yeah. And I turned out he was fucking crazy. So that was scary. New York in 1982, following a lunatic who doesn't really have a place to stay. That was scary.
That was a great year.
Yeah, that was a good year, all right. I don't remember most of it because I was cowering in a residence hotel on Lexington Avenue. But this is what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But I was always a follower.
Gotcha.
And then, and even when we did the create our own, a bunch of us got together and did a create our own imprint at Dark Horse, which I benefited more from that than anybody else,
Yeah.
because it was Frank Miller and Dave Gibbons and Art Adams and their little pal Mike Mignola, who had no big, everybody else had a big following or a big book behind him, and I just happened to be pals with these guys.
Yeah.
So when they go, hey, we'll all be in this group together,
Yeah.
it's shown a spotlight on Hellboy. I mean, Hellboy might have come and gone unnoticed had it just been another Dark Horse comic.
Mhm.
But the fact that this group managed to hang together for about 6 months or a year or whatever, and it was on the cover of Wizard magazine, suddenly I had that association with guys like Frank Miller and those guys.
Yeah.
So that helped. That was a right place at the right time.
It was amazing
thing.
timing. Yeah. Well, I guess that kind of goes into something else that I thought would be awesome that we've already started talking about, which is like knowledge, time, and growth. I think one thing that is insanely amazing that I love seeing is process and evolution in art, and to have come into Hellboy after it had started and like go back and because I didn't get into comics until college as well, and bookshelves of my friends were my education. And discovering this for the first time and like really seeing it track through, it's amazing to see this body of work really kind of flow.
That's fine.
and
I've never
evolve.
seen those two pieces side by side, the first Hellboy cover and the last Hellboy cover.
That's just how I roll.
Yeah, that's good. You really didn't have that big of shoulders even to begin with.
Well,
You had at least one shoulder.
One thing that I thought was really amazing is that Hellboy is insanely flawed. He's stocky. He's impatient. He's just kind of like an every blue collar man.
Right, what you know.
And but I don't know about you guys, but I mean I identified with this guy immediately, but I have nothing in common with the right hand of doom.
No,
You know, I mean
me-
it was human. The humanistic aspects of this character in this entire world and the community that you developed, I think was did what a lot of that literature and especially a lot of the characters and stories that were established. I mean, we got immersed.
That to me is I never thought about any kind of literary influence in Hellboy, because to me, and again, I didn't know how to write mainstream comics.
Yeah.
And John Byrne did script the first Hellboy,
Yeah.
and I think he gave it a mainstream comics polish
Mhm.
that really, I did not have the confidence to script this thing myself.
Yeah.
In fact, my original idea was, I will give John a list of shit I want to draw and let him tie it together into a story.
Yeah.
But then as I listed all the shit I wanted to draw, it kind of cobbled itself into a story in that weird way that I can't explain.
And that's where the seed came from?
Yeah, writing is just a total mystery to me how that shit gets done. But
You obviously knew something.
I don't know. I read a lot.
Yeah.
So I drew the thing, and then I had to script it so John could script it.
Yeah.
And that's a really good training ground where you just go, I get to write a book and know that somebody's going to fix it.
Yeah.
It's not as scary as actually just writing a book where they go, oh no, they're going to actually publish the words I wrote.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
but
when-
you had
and
to
when-
learn something too in the process, right?
Yeah, I did. And John knew I would.
Yeah.
John, to his credit, never tried to make this our book.
Mm-hmm.
He always knew it was my book and that I should be writing it myself.
Oh.
So basically, he helped me out.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, by the end, I was kind of editing his script a bit. He was overwriting,
Oh.
which I realized. And also, what I found is there were places where I would write a certain line of dialogue, and John would just tweak it. And I was like, kind of liked it better the way I had it. and I suspect John knew that would be the case.
Yeah.
So at the end of the miniseries, he said, "You're on your own, son." And thank you very much. And then it was a nightmare having to write one by myself.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have a crutch. And that first one I wrote myself was published in black and white. And it wasn't this one.
Yeah.
And the black and white one was horrifying because it's my words and no color. It's just me. It's as naked as you can be. It's just, here's a piece of white paper.
Yeah.
And I got to do the whole fucking thing, and that's how they're going to print it. That was horrifying. That was the second one. Fortunately, I had a very patient editor who talked me through the writing quite a bit. And then this one, I just, for whatever reason, I I just had fun.
Yeah.
It was an old Irish folktale that I always wanted to adapt. They asked me to do, it was a weird, there used to be another, there was a Diamond catalog, but there was also Capital City had a catalog. And somehow they came up with this idea that they wanted to run a comic in there that would run in 2-page installments.
Yeah.
And I thought of this old Irish folktale because it was very episodic. So I said, I can adapt, I can do my version of that story and do it in 2-page installments. But I drew the whole thing at one time.
Yeah.
And I just had fun. I wasn't thinking about comics, I wasn't thinking about anything, I was just thinking about this cool old story. And when I finished, it was like when I finished it, it was like I sobered up and went, oh fuck, what's this? Oh no. And I really thought it was unpublishable because it was so different than anything I had done. And it's almost like, oh, this was too much fun. It can't be any good. Yeah. And I remember honestly being in a panic about it and going out to lunch with a guy who eventually became an editor, but at the time he was an art dealer. And I sat there at lunch like this while he read it.
Yeah.
And he said, it's actually the best thing you've ever done. And I was honestly shocked. And maybe there was a part of me that thought, maybe it actually is good, I don't know, but I'm so doom and gloom. I was like, no, I'm just screwed. And it was such a relief. And then when it was published, Craig Russell called me and wanted to buy pages. Charlie Bess got a hold of me somehow and said how much he liked it, and I went, some art heroes like it, the fans like it, and it was the most fun I've ever had.
Yeah.
Oh, holy shit. This could work.
Yeah.
The thing I'm having the most fun doing is the thing people like the best. So this was a pretty big, maybe this thing can work.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, the world building that went on and how all of these stories inevitably linked together and flowed, I mean, it really built out a massive thing that we as an audience, the readers, and I'm sure you, I mean, we could explore. It was almost like getting in the head and in the space of this world and this land.
Yeah, and again, it's certainly expanded a lot, but it was never intended to be anything big.
Yeah.
It just kind of snowballed little by little. It doesn't take much to introduce new characters, and then some of those characters, you introduce them and they just lay there, and some characters go, hey, don't put me away, I've got other shit to do. And that's why that writing stuff just gets weird. We just go, I don't know, okay, if you want to do that, let's do that.
Well, that was like what we were talking about earlier too. I mean, the aspects of Hellboy and Hell, where, I mean, literally a lot of characters come back, and a lot of storylines fruition, conclusions, continuations. I mean, the way that everything kind of stitches together and characters come back was really fascinating to read and see in that final.
Again, I wrote things. Fortunately, I wrote things very vaguely because I didn't. When I created Hellboy, I didn't know anything about who the character was.
Yeah.
I never intended to get into the origins of the character. The reason Hellboy ended up being the Beast of the Apocalypse. I mean, even the first series, Rasputin's like, oh, you have a destiny. I'm like, I don't know what that means. I drew a page where they're looking at each other, and it looks like they must be talking about something. And then when I did the second miniseries, Wake the Devil, here's a lesson I learned. When you're going to have two characters, even if they're fighting, have some idea what they're going to say before you draw it. Because I drew this long scene with the back and forth of these two characters fighting, and you go, oh, it'll be a dramatic close-up, and then, if they're talking to each other, no idea what they were going to say.
Yeah.
And when it came to scripting, I'm like, oh shit, I got way too many panels for can't get me, yes I can. I can't write that idiot Spider-Man, banter. So she ends up saying, your destiny is blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, really? Oh shit, I mean, literally he became the Beast of the Apocalypse because I didn't know what else to have her say. And then I spent years bringing it up and then saying, why the fuck am I bringing this up? I don't want him to be the Beast of the Apocalypse. There's one panel somewhere where a character brings it up again. It's like one part of me is writing one bit and another part of me is writing the other bit.
Yeah.
One part, and it's your destiny. facing this demon. He's like, blah, 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 blah. And then I'm like, shut up. So Hellboy is saying, I'm not that, I'm never going to be that, and I never want to fucking talk about that again.
Yeah.
And I literally meant that. You know, it's like, no, put it away. But I had, ruled out all these prophecies and stuff over the years, and at some point you go, I don't think that shit's going to go away.
Yeah.
Because of me. So I better start figuring out what some of this shit means.
That brings me to pancakes.
Yeah.
That is a perfect segue into this two-pager.
Yeah. Well,
Right? So, I mean, that little bit of humanity that is in here, and then the fruition that ends up culminating the end of the story, where it's like, nope, he's gone.
yeah, well, when he went to hell, there was never any pancake discussion. I figured all those guys had been killed off or something before Hellboy got
So
there.
where did this come from? Was
This is
this
my-
argument
this is from-
internally, or?
This is my trying to get my 4-year-old to eat anything other than hot noodles. And you would put something that wasn't hot noodles in front of her, and she looked like you put a live snake in front of her. And she would do that. She would go rigid like that.
Nice.
And I got a call from Dark Horse one day, and they said, here's another life lesson. We're doing an issue of Dark Horse Presents, which is all stories about the characters when they were little.
Mm-hmm.
Would you do one of these? And my brain said, no, because I don't want to do that. But because I'm a wise ass, I said, yeah, I'll do a 2-page story where he eats pancakes. And they went, okay. And I'm like, oh, fuck. So I knew what to do with the first page.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, well, shit, what do I do now? And then I just thought that would be funny.
And then
It never occurred to me anybody would ever see this. It never occurred to me it would be one of the most talked about Hellboy stories. I think I sold the originals, for $100 to a girl who worked at Dark Horse, because it was like, and I never thought it would be in any trade paperbacks, right?
Yeah.
But it turned out to be more popular than I thought.
That's
And then, of
awesome.
course, they want to fucking put it in the movie. So, yeah, there you go.
Oh my god, that's awesome. All right. Well, I got tons of other stuff I want to ask you, but I know I want to get to questions in the audience. But I guess lastly, your design and your economy of line, storytelling, dialogue, and page design has always been fascinating. And one thing that I certainly love, that I really appreciate in your work is just the dynamism, design, and efficiency of how simply deliciously complex all of this really gets. Right? Because and we talked a little bit earlier about comics being a love-hate relationship. Your typography and design is really fascinating, and it really merges and becomes part of the art, the story, and the engagement of the narrative in total, whatever scene is happening.
One of the things I miss now that we don't letter on the boards is drawing word balloons. Because there's so much personality in word balloons, and not being able to draw boldness. I can never get a letterer I can never explain to a letterer how I want the tail to be shaped. You just gotta live with that. But the one thing I do is the sound effects. Because again, you showed the slide before.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I didn't do the sound effects on the guy shooting the gun. And the letters are just ugly to me. They don't look like my kind of letters. So the sound effect is so much a part of the artwork. I have to control where it goes. I mean, I do balloon placements on my own work, so I, to some extent, control at least where the balloons go, which is part of the rhythm of the storytelling. And the sound effects are just, to me, they're just a piece of the artwork. They're not something that can be just added by some guy, wherever they're going to fit.
Well, I type in design, especially in comics, feels like it is as important in storytelling as the art and the story itself. It has to work together.
I've got a friend who's a very accomplished letterer and designer, and for a while he was living near me, so when I was going to go back to draw comics, I was going to have him actually hand letter stuff, which he hasn't done since probably the 90s. But now he's threatening to make a font that's my hand lettering. So, and we probably could do something where I draw up a bunch of word balloons, so he can use those.
Yeah, I love doing that. So that's what we're doing right now.
And there's a hand drawn quality to the word balloon.
Yeah.
And that's me trying to be perfect, but it's hand drawn.
It has just enough of that hand touch to match the art.
It's like, you know,
It's got an aesthetic.
anytime I draw a moon, I might have used a circle template to pencil it, but I would never ink with a circle template because it would stand out like a sore thumb. I'd never ink with a ruler except for panel borders, because it would stick out like a sore thumb because it's not organic. I will try to be as perfect as possible, knowing that there's no way to be. So everything, whether you're aware of it or not, everything's just a little bit natural feeling.
Oh, that's awesome. I hate rulers too. That's great. And then of course I'm gonna have to.
My greatest hits.
I know, right?
Real genius shit right there.
Is it? I heard a rumor that you hate drawing monkeys and apes.
I don't hate them, but I don't particularly like them.
Yeah.
But the thing I'd say about monkeys is they always work.
They always work.
They always work.
Monkeys and skulls.
Yeah.
Monkeys and skulls.
Yeah. I do like drawing skulls.
Yeah.
And he was actually.
Well, it's a give and take. It's a give and take.
Hate drawing guns, but again, there's that gag.
Is there one thing that you will never draw? One thing you're just like, nope, not gonna do it.
I'd say cars, but a funky old clunky car. Yeah, I could get excited about drawing that. Skyscrapers, things like that. You know, real techie kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And then just one last question before I turn it over. Architecture.
Yeah.
Is this is architecture, furniture, like spatial prop design? Is that maybe just from you growing up with your dad, and or was there a love for it?
There may be a thing about growing up with a craftsman kind of guy, and in some way this feeling for wood and furniture was kind of instilled, and I have an uncle who's an antique dealer, so I like old antique kind of stuff. But I used to be terrified of drawing any kind of buildings until I lived in New York. And then you know, for me buildings were a perspective assignment. You know, it was vanishing points and rulers and shit like that. And then you walk around New York City and you go, that building's kind of leaning over. And that's, you know, when I did that fantasy book, Fafner and the Grey Mouser, I used New York City for reference. Because Fritz Leiber, who wrote those stories, was writing about New York City. Even though it was a fantasy book, Lankmar was his version of New York City. But it was a fantasy version, which is why I did a fantasy book where the fantasy buildings kind of look like New York buildings, and there's water towers.
Oh, okay. Nice.
So, yeah, that's where I started not being afraid of buildings.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so with that, I would certainly love to open it up to audiences for...
I will jump in because you had a question about Baba Yaga.
I do, if you don't mind.
I will say that I distinctly remember, it's like one of those light bulb moments. 5th grade.
She's my favorite.
5th grade, a girl, I can't remember her name, in my 5th grade class did a book report on some book about Baba Yaga, and she actually built, and I'm sure it was horrible, but at the time, she built the chicken leg house.
Really?